CEO Power Panel. When in Rome, what would Caesar bet on?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Great. So good afternoon. My name is Oliver De Bono. I am the CEO, well, was the CEO, now the founder of Quantum Gaming. Basically, we're here today to discuss a very interesting topic. When in Rome, what would Caesar do? I'd like to initially welcome to the stage my panelists, starting with Mr. Marcel Tobler, CEO at Swiss Casinos. Let's give Marcel a warm hand. Not too many people in the crowd. Second, Richard Dennys, CEO at Game Lounge. It's just us for now. Nikolay Lobov, CEO at Nobles Gaming. How are you, Nikolay? I know we've done a few panels together, so I'm looking forward to this. And last but not least, Franz Gerhart, CEO at Vyking. Fantastic. Great. So, one really elite group of panelists today. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm also quite excited to discuss a more generic topic. Today's session is more about understanding, let's call it the trials and tribulation of the gaming industry. We had, sorry guys, I'm getting a bit of feedback. We had a interesting, can you guys hear me? It's miking out. So, we had an interesting discussion, pre-panel, about a topic I think many of us wanted to bring attention to. And I just want to kick off with this a little bit. And Richard, I'm going to start with you because I saw your keynote yesterday as well. I was at the Ace Alliance event. And I want to kick off on a little bit of an interesting subject. We've all seen businesses come into the industry, overstretch their position, and for one reason or another, let's call it lose market share. We're not here to talk about failing businesses, but we're looking at the pitfalls that we can avoid or learn from the veterans of the industry, what we can avoid as, let's call it founders, entrepreneurs, and people who are establishing themselves in this market. So, less of a question, more of a discussion point. Richard, where do you see, let's call it the pitfalls in this industry when it comes to overstretching and losing your market share?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and nice to meet everybody. I think this came when originally when we were talking about the panel, you know, what are the parallels with ancient Rome and the gambling industry? And I've come from, I'm not an industry veteran. I am a veteran, but I'm not an industry veteran in gaming. I've only been in gaming for 2 years. But before that, I worked in e-commerce and retail, and I've seen lots of things happen. And one of the things that's happens quite a lot is you get a very successful business that believes its own PR. It buys a few companies. It does very well. It expands into different markets, and then, without trying, the complete focus and ethos of the company changes, because it's very difficult to control a much larger business. And not often with founders they started with 2 or 3 people, and all of a sudden they've got 2,000 people to look after. And there's parallels with the expansion of the Roman Empire, where, you know, they were conquering and they were defeating and they were taking on new territories and they were, you know, winning everything until they stopped winning. And that was the reason, because they were just too far away from the front lines. They were too far away from what it was, and also personal sort of priorities, senior managers, everybody else, you know, they had their own way, and the alignment got lost. And the initial sort of emotion and focus of those early days just petered out. You know,
you touched on something that I find really interesting, and that's the line I just want to pick on a little bit, too far from the front lines. What we see a lot of, as a founder myself, is I think once a lot of gaming companies get to a certain stage, they get large enough, they bring in institutional investors, and I just find that suddenly at this point, maybe it's not the love. I think it's the attention to detail, it's the drive, something changes. We always joke, when gaming companies turn corporate, that's when, you know, people are numbers, the businesses change, the markets change. And I really like what you said, that, you know, at the end of the day, you're no longer on the front lines as a leader.
Yeah, and also the mix of your people. So you'll hire a lot, at the beginning you'll hire a lot of generalists, so people that can do lots of different roles. And then as you switch through, you have to get specialists. And the generalists hate being a specialist, and specialists hate being generalists. So you have this kind of sweet and salty water mix that causes a lot of friction and tension. And you get accused of being too corporate, and you get accused of too focused on profits. and then the original people who had that energy and passion, they just leave.
That's really interesting because we hear this a lot. So I also had, I was in recruitment nearly 2 decades ago, and one of the words we often heard was, I don't want to work for a corporate entity. So this is exactly what you said. This is when you lose your generalists, who are often your hardest workers, let's be fair.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Marcel, I want to jump onto you. I see you're eager to get into this one, and I'd really love your opinion. So, you know, trials and tribulations. Why do companies change? Why do we go from those getting your hands dirty to corporate entities that everyone's responsibilities are kept within a very strict box?
I mean, the truth is you have to. At a certain stage of a company lifetime and at a certain size of your company, not everybody can do everything anymore. You need to hire specialists that focus on one part. And then there is one thing in my view, which is for a strategy, the most difficult thing to find in a company is alignment. Alignment between different businesses you have within a group and within different teams. And that's really hard. And you run the risk that different teams go in different direction, not because they want to go in different direction, but just we have no way or a good way to align them the way we did before when the office was 10 people. You know, there was no alignment necessary. You had a coffee in the morning and you were perfectly aligned. That doesn't work anymore with 600 people.
No, I agree with that 100%. You need to find a way to look at a structure that works. You know, your daily stand-ups, they work, but you don't want to go over the top. Nikolay, I'm going to switch to you on this one because we're seeing a lot of change in the industry, and this is where things get interesting. Look at companies like, I don't know, I'm just going to use Telegram as an example. Everyone's talking about how it's a lean team, 30 people, no HR department. You know, at what point do you decide, I want to go to a 600-person operation, as you mentioned, Marcel? When does the CEO decide whether they want to keep it as a lean organization or they need the numbers to expand? Where's that decision making?
Okay, so it's very touchy. Can you hear me, guys? Yeah. Good. Thank you. It's a very touchy topic for personally for me as well. I came to gambling industry from IT corporate background, so to say, and I think we faced that issue already in many companies and many processes. And of course, there is no right answer for the moment and for how you decide. But what I try to implement in my companies, in companies I manage, it's from the beginning, do not focus only on growth and only on the drive and momentum, but I try to keep my structure optimized and, so to say, cut the redundancies in the beginning. So not to grow into something which you can't control and managed from a, let's say, central point. And that's the problem of many companies from my personal point of view. That once you grow, like a Rome Empire, yes, in our discussion, so you can't control everything. And when you dilute your core competencies in the like founders team and whatever, and stretch too far, so you are not in the control of it, and that's make you like a corporation which is not, very more chaotic and lives their own life. I don't know, in IT, so my favorite one is, of course, it's Elon Musk and his approach to run the companies. And you guys know what was done to Twitter. So just in simple words, 75% was fired. And now it's running better. I'm a great fan of, I'm using X. And so I like this company. That's in the IT world. So I think it's, we are very much following those trends a little bit with some lag, with the delay in the iGaming industry, but it's same direction and same way.
I 100% agree. I mean, it's always the question, right? Which direction do you want to go in? And I find this one really interesting as many businesses often scale up, and I would say temporarily. You know, there are periods within a company's life cycle that you need people, you need mass, you need numbers. But as you grow, as your technology improves, whether you're in the technology game, eventually you're going to scale down again. It's a very difficult decision. I think one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make as a CEO or founder is when you have to come to that decision. And like you said, removing 75% of your team. Franz, I'm going to switch to you. I want to change gears a little bit. You mentioned something quite interesting. You know, Rome was one of the original, let's call it the APIs of Europe. You also mentioned an open architecture. What's your take on what we can learn from this? I mean, is it about being diverse or cutthroat? Because ultimately, when you have to make a decision to cut 75% of your team, it's not an easy thing to do. So a combination of having good tech, open architecture, but being a central point. What's your take on the direction that leaders should take in this business?
I would really like to pick up on the open architecture part here. And this basically ties into some of the things that you guys said before. So I'm an engineer at heart, or actually by trade. And as an engineer, I'm deeply worried about one thing, and that is scaling. You don't want to be the bottleneck. You don't want to put people's businesses at risk by you as an engineering platform, not allowing them the opportunity to scale. And if you look at it, battles are not won by tactics, they're won by logistics. So you want to have big teams which are being able to autonomously operate. And open architecture, and Rome especially, as a platform, so to speak, that provides open architecture allows you to scale. That's one of the principles of the organization that we are running. You do allow other people self-service opportunities. You give them the opportunity to build their own technology based on a framework. And Rome essentially is a framework. This was the whole premise. This is what it was predicated upon. You have a framework in which economy, in which people can thrive. And that you can only do if you give the people the autonomy to build their own things. This is, just to go further into what you said before, if you have a company which arrives at a certain stage and you wanna kick out 70% of your workforce, as you mentioned with Twitter, you have to have good autonomous teams which can work independently. And I think this is the decision that you need to make. Because if you have too many people which are too specialized and they have only their very narrow focus on a specific product at a specific time, and they need a 20 managerial people around them to deliver a good product, you're going to fail. You're not going to be able to break down a big operation like Twitter, throw out 70% of the workforce, and then expect those very special people, which are having a very narrow focus, to succeed in taking it over. And so my fundamental goal is that you not only give people the self-service opportunities to build their own tech based on a framework, but also give them the opportunity to stay product focused. So you want to implement your vision, you need to be able to do it. You don't want to take care of the heavy lifting, the infrastructure, the architecture, the server side. You know, you want all these things, these business logic heavy parts, to be abstracted, but then build your own thing on top of it. Have your own UI.
Definitely. I worked at Nokia for a while, and they employed the same structure, but then you knew that these SBUs would come up, and if they worked, they were carried on, and if they stopped, then they were gone. So there was always that dynamic, and I know Microsoft was built on that basis of small villages within a big organization. I mean, your point about making people redundant, and your point, sorry, was that it is the hardest thing you can ever do. It's the most difficult thing you can do. It's the most emotional thing you have to go through. But unfortunately, if you're owned by other people who are used to seeing businesses thrive and be sold, unfortunately, you don't really have any choice. And that's a very difficult thing to get through any organization, very difficult, especially when you've got popular members of the team with their own teams, and then unfortunately, for whatever reason, they have to leave. And then as a leader, you have to manage through that, which is probably the worst thing and hardest thing I have to do. So yeah, it's a really difficult one. But you have to, because there's no such thing as linear growth. It doesn't happen. There's ski jump growth, and there's bumpy growth, and there's negative growth, but there's no such thing as smooth growth at all.
So I love this one because, I mean, ultimately, you mentioned something that I really find interesting as a founder of a platform, you know, the concept of open architecture. But as you said, Richard, it's true that there's no, let's call it outright, there's no smooth operation. Things are going to change, you're going to consolidate your teams, and it's a very hard decision to make. I think it's ultimately about finding a balance between the two. Finding a balance between what do I really need. I want to touch just a little bit because I prefer to kind of focus on the subjects that you guys bring up when it comes to this talk. The issue we find though with open architecture, let's say from our end, is if you have a, let's call it a linear roadmap, when you're building tech as a PAM provider ourselves, it's very difficult to kind of allow, let's call it outside influences, change the direction of that tech, unless you're creating some kind of ecosystem. But what is the direction? Do you feel like they're all contributing, let's say, to the core development? Because I like the idea of it. In theory, I wanted to do that with quantum gaming, but to put it into practice, to have different engineers pulling, I wouldn't say in different directions, but it can happen. I just want to take your take on how you tackle that, maintaining your roadmap, but allowing external factors to contribute to that.
How much time do I have?
No.
So you have to first differentiate between front-end engineering and back-end engineering. So back-end engineering is obviously very hard because you have to get the BI sorted, you have to do all the data storing, data maneuvering, including all the pipelines, you have the server infrastructure. There's a lot of complicated things that you have to do in order for your core to work very reliably. You have to process in sub-milliseconds tens of thousands of transactions, and that you need to be able to do. And for this, you're not flexible, you have to have a solid core. But then if you look at all the third-party integrations, the content, the front end, all of this you don't need to do in-house. You don't need to do on your own. And if you can rally many teams in parallel at the same time, you can scale infinitely faster than if you just build everything on your core proprietary stack in-house. So that's one of the things, like open source as much as you can. That's our premise for growth. You build something, you open source it, you give it away to your customers, they can take it, but they can also choose to build it entirely on their own with their own tech stack. And then it's not entirely not selfish, because if you have others do that scaling parameter for you, you also have free time to focus more on the core. So if you let other people take over that source code, be the owners of their product, develop them further independently, they also gain identity along with it, because it's their thing. It's no longer you who control it. It's not that you open a website and by the loading screen you already understand which supplier it is in the background, right? You can do something on your own without lock-in.
I 100% agree with it. I think my experience, and again, this is all of us talking about our experiences, we've all tried different things. We actually wanted to bring this to the market with Quantum. We wanted to, here's a copy of our source code, go with it. We have a strict line of what we are developing within our roadmap, and then you can, let's say, subscribe to that development and then contribute your own. The issue we found is we now need to go into management services because proprietary tech is proprietary tech. It's very hard. It's kind of like giving an artist a half-finished piece of work. I mean, they don't know what the idea was originally.
Yeah, but the risk profile of management services is a lot less than proprietary services. So when I arrived, we were spending millions on software, of our own software, in-house software, and I'm saying, well, why are we doing that? The answer actually is that we've got some very skilled people, and it makes sense to, but there's a lot of SaaS businesses out there losing money, so why are we losing money on doing the same thing? And now with AI, and we had a spookathon the other day, hackathon with Lovable, you can build this stuff quickly. I know it's very, very front-end and loose level, but you really have to think about what it is you're trying to do. We're not a platform business, we're an affiliate, but we have a platform. And then we're always thinking, is it build or buy, is it build or buy? The risk profile of buying is way less than if you build it. I mean, management services risk profile is much easier than proprietary service building, that's for sure,
But then you also have to give people their time, you have to pay the devil its due. If you look back 10, 15 years ago, like gaming operators have been marketing companies largely, and nowadays they transition into more being tech companies. So essentially, if you put out source code like 15 years ago, you only had a fraction of the people which would be eligible to actually do something with it. Now it's very different. People realize that they have to have a tech force in-house, and they're capitalizing on it. They're banking on it, actually. So it's not, I agree with your point, it's not happening anytime soon that everyone will do their own proprietary front end and do their custom content integrations at the back end, but it's slowly transitioning there.
Oh, no, I agree. I'm just, from our side, or let's say my perspective, even though You know, we're trying to develop something that we do want to be open source, but you also want to maintain the quality of the product. But I want to switch gears to you a second, Marcel, just because I know you're in a more regulated space. And obviously within this unit, you have a little bit less room to operate and let people contribute to that, let's say, whether it's the core development. But I'd really like to understand, you know, with your background, how do you see the industry changing? How do we not stretch ourselves within a regulated space again, because there are more costs and there are more requirements?
Yeah, happy to answer that. But before, it was very technical before. But the same issue we have with tech, we also have with people, right? We have to give the people more flexibility. You know, now the new buzzword is positionless marketing, where everybody can do everything. And I think that goes in the same trend and in the same need. We need to be more flexible to be fast. And that also applies for a market which is highly regulated, just as Switzerland, because you cannot just get the standard from the market. It needs to be adjusted in a way so you're able to convince the regulator that that should work. And this is a very hard discussion. But what I believe, we often undervalue the strategic value in a deep knowledge of regulation. Because with that value, you can be very creative and you can generate innovation that will work in a highly regulated industry. And I think our industry overall gets more and more regulated. So it can be a very big advantage to have that knowledge. And that's where we try to focus on. We try to focus on find our niche to grow by utilizing that very deep knowledge of regulation and that very deep pressure we have from the regulator to build up a product which will be better working or will add additional value in highly regulated markets.
Fantastic. You know, I love having these conversations because they do pull you in a different direction, even though we started on Rome. And I want to touch something quickly with you, Richard, just because we're seeing a very similar scenario to overstretching happening in the market now. I mean, not to say anything, obviously, I'm not a regulator, but, you know, last year, 2 years ago, everyone went into the sweepstakes model. They're now being regulated. I know you guys have some sway in the States, but that is the perfect example of stretching. Heavily invested in sweepstakes, change in regulation, as you mentioned, Marcel, and then suddenly a drawback from the market. You've got to pull back, you've got to reinvest and rebuild your product. I mean, what's your take on this direction? We've got the same thing happening with crypto casinos. Regulation changes. Companies invest tens, hundreds of millions in these markets, and then suddenly need to make a change because regulation says, oh, we don't like that anymore.
You know, this is the gambling industry, and people are gambling, and in every industry there are, but this one particularly tends to be pretty, you know, risk hungry. When I arrived at Game Lounge, we had betting.com, we had, which is a global sports site, we had 6 sites in the US, including American Casino Guide, and they just weren't getting the traction we needed. So we closed them down and we sold one of them because we wanted to specialize. The trouble with really specializing, is that you then start to lose that agility because you're so specialist in one area. You know, the sweepstakes thing came across us very early on last year. We looked at it, we talked about it as a board. We've got some pretty blue chip investors. They didn't really like the idea of it. I know that some of our peer groups have gone heavy into it, and you'll see the results this quarter, in the next week. I think some of them done very well, but as you say, you know, that comes with some pretty big negative downsides around the regulation side of things. So I think the way that we look at this is we've got to stay agile. We need to have an agile workforce that we can change quickly because the industry is just switching around. Look at Brazil. Brazil was like massive, and then all of a sudden it was just like super underperforming. And then you've got crypto casinos which are exciting, but there's millions of them. There's no moat. So you know, who do you work with? So our point of view is we work with whoever pays us up front the most. I mean, that's the only way we can do it. And then there'll be something coming along later which will be different, but it's very difficult. Regulations are changing, it's cat and mouse, and you have to be very, very agile to be able to swing around those things. Otherwise, you know, like you were saying, if you just freeze up, then you're just absolutely ripe for disruption, and then ultimately death.
Well, I 100% agree with being agile. It's ultimately one of the most important things in a dynamic industry like gaming. But that agility does cost money, right? You need to be flexible. I want to switch over a bit to yourself, Nikolay, because one thing I want to touch on here is agility does cost money, but we are moving into a stage where I believe that there's a massive consolidation of brands coming. Why? Sweepstakes, crypto casinos, changes in regulation. It's a guaranteed pullback on the market. We know this. We're seeing it from the regulators. Ultimately, this costs jobs, this costs money. What can the entrepreneurs, what can the CEOs do to prepare for the coming changes? And I think we've all been in the business long enough to know that there will be a swing. Over to you, Nikolay. What can we do to prepare for the coming changes?
Actually, to prepare well for all those changes, it's just to be a part of those changes. I think this is, you can't really react, but you need to be in the flow of those changes and act as like an integral part of it. And this is just the way how we try to address it, and not to, yes, regulation is always changeable, and it's not always ideal. And in some parts of our teams and other companies, we believe then the regulator is just something which prevents us from doing our business and to unleash our full creativity, so they just restrict us. But it's not exactly how it works, because if we go in the same direction with regulation and completely follow what we need to do, how to we go to the particular market, what's peculiar ways about going into those markets, so we can be fully aligned with it. I think that you are not reacting, you are going and be more proactive. So this is the idea. And always it's high-stake decisions. Yeah, so what we had in the history and what we are talking about in this panel. So like generals in the past of Roman Empire, yeah. So we have to make our decisions. And I really love this small point about Roman generals, because for decision, every decision has its own price, and their stake was their lives. In our way, it's a little bit easier, so we just pay with our money and with maybe career, whatever. But we always make decisions, and this is based on experience and based on where market is going. Very generic words, but I think that's how it works.
It's a good. If I could just pick up on that. Sorry. If you look at India, so India, I was in Lisbon, and the CEO of Flutter stood up and talked, and he said on a Thursday he was on holiday. By Sunday he had to make 1,200 people redundant in India because of they passed a law to ban money-based games. Kanji was shut down as a brand, and they had no idea that was going to happen. And unfortunately, 1,200 people in India lost their jobs as a result of this. And then tomorrow is another Supreme Court decision where they may reverse it, in which case they have to get those people back.
So, but this is ultimately this is why we call it a dynamic industry, isn't it? That ultimately regulations change. It is a disruptor industry. It's in some regions of the world taboo, some regions highly regulated. We know that we need to adapt to this. I think the tough thing to do as a leader, as a CEO, is to help people or convince people to believe in your idea and your goal, and then say, okay, our regulations change it, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to let you go. Marcel, I want to switch, because the Swiss market has been quite stable, and if I'm not mistaken, you're a veteran in this market, you can correct me, but what do we see? Do we see any upcoming changes that are going to require people to look at the market differently? Because one thing I can say, probably shouldn't be saying this, but a lot of grey market operators still love Switzerland. So what do we see changing there? How can we prepare for stricter regulations? What can the businesses do to prepare for markets like Switzerland?
I mean, we have the opposite problem in Switzerland. Things we would like to change quick take years. They take years, it may take 20 years, and they never change. And the biggest problem we have currently is actually we are the best affiliate for black market operators, because we ban every year thousands of players. We are so highly regulated. If somebody doesn't submit their payroll documents to us, we have to ban that player for life. And that player turns around and goes into the black market. And we cannot change that because we are forced to do that by the regulator. And this is a really difficult situation. You know, we have a lot of ideas how we could do that better, how we could do it better for the player. It doesn't help the player at all the way we do it, but it takes years. And many discussions on a political level to even bring slightest changes to that fact. So we have to compensate that. We have to find new ways how can we compensate that issue with other countermeasures to still keep the market attractive and still growing.
Can I pick up on that? Is this a race which you fear you're gonna lose?
Sorry, what was that?
Is this a race which you fear that you're gonna lose? I mean, you're talking here about someone who is essentially an antagonist, right? Your natural enemies, you and the regulator. If they take the longest time and the gray market players take your, you know, the gray market guys take your players, well, I mean, aren't you afraid that you're gonna lose the battle?
I don't see the regulator as an enemy. The regulator at the end has to put in action the law. So the regulator cannot change a law in Switzerland. That is a very long political process. And the way the law was worded wasn't very smart, looking back. And it already shows we are losing that market because if a player is banned, that player is also banned for the land-based casino. So with the growth of online casinos, we have seen a big growth in banned players, and this generates a decline in the land-based market. So everything is very linked with each other, and that makes it very hard. And we cannot change that. We start now, or the regulator starts to realize that, hey, if we ban a player for life, we do not protect it. We just get them out of sight. And that is not helping the player.
Yeah, over-regulation. It's affecting every single operator that's working in regulated markets. They've got the regulation, they've got taxes. And we always say, whenever I have conversation with a regulator, I'm saying, the sign of a healthy market is a sign of profitable operators. If you don't have profitable operators, you can guarantee that your players are disappearing in droves, in hundreds of thousands.
But I think it's, just to jump in on this one, because it's really interesting what you're saying. We've always said that over-regulation leads to a black market. We know this. This is going to happen everywhere in the world. But at the same time, you want to create a little bit of a protection for those players, right? So I want to touch on this. I think we've been given some extra time because, I mean, this is exactly what I wanted. We start on a topic and then we go into direction. But I think the ultimate understanding here is there truly a way of being prepared for the market changes? I want to continue with you, Richard, because we're seeing that regulations change overnight. India,
Everywhere.
48 hours to
Brazil.
changes.
Yeah, Finland's coming up. Finland doesn't know whether they want to be affiliates are allowed or not allowed, and so they're saying they're going to allow brand marketing, and then the operators are saying, well, basically every Finnish person is only ever going to see advertisers for gambling on their TV stations for the next 5 years. So there's always consequences of all these decisions. But, you know, how can you do it? We're in this really fragmented, in Europe particularly, everyone's got a different regulation. It's really difficult. So all you can do is lay bets, like everyone in this room, like the players that we're talking to. And then you just have to see which ones come in and which ones don't. And then act early on if you think it's not going to work.
100%. I mean, starting the business is laying a bet within itself, right? And I've just heard today, I don't know if this is true, that they will start taking applications Q1 next year. Should we prepare for that? Or
sorry,
are we
what was that?
That Finland will start taking applications.
Oh yes, no, that's true, yeah.
So will we end up with a grace period similar to that of the Netherlands? How long will that grace period be? I mean, in all fairness, it does affect everything. If you think of today that, you know, regulators like the MGA, the only true market that most MGA casinos were, let's say, openly targeting was Finland, but that's about to close, right? Those doors are closing. So everyone's going to get affected by it. Okay, MGA, Latin America, there's still a lot of opportunity. I know we've been given a little bit of extra time, but I just want to get a little bit of a closing comment from each of you. I'll start with you, Franz, because, I mean, we started this, how do we not overstretch? We're now into the changes of regulation. It's all the same thing. You invest in a product, that product is no longer allowed. Where do we go from here? Closing speech or closing comments. What can we do as entrepreneurs, leaders, to prepare for this market change?
Can I leave regulations out?
Yes, yes.
Narrative-driven brands. If you look at Caesar, he was a master in storytelling, right? The more we focus on storytelling, the more we get the brands to be autonomous, I think the more successful they can individually become. And eventually there's a lifetime to each and every brand, and you should not overstay the welcome. And I think we should facilitate that process. Let new brands come, let them be successful, empower their teams, and well, I'm glad that I don't need to speak about the regulatory aspect of it.
For sure. Richard, I'd love your opinion.
Yes, so I think this week Tim Heath from YOLO Group gave a very revealing video about how hard it is to transfer from an unregulated into a regulated environment. It was a fascinating thing. I've watched it 3 times. It's just there's so many interesting parts of that speech. You know, I think it is very difficult to navigate, especially when you're in a fast growth mode, to then stop that growth and go in a different direction. It's really hard. I mean, again, at Nokia, used to say you have to smash the iceberg and then wait for it to reset before you can set it in another direction. It's very difficult to move it at speed. But I think that's the thing. The closing argument is you have to retain your agility. And if there are people in your organization that don't like that, then they can't be in it for the longer term. You have to identify all the time, from the top to the bottom, people who are willing to change for the better good, for the best, you know, the best outcomes.
Or you split the entities, then
Or
you're
you split it around. But it goes from sea level to ground level. You have to have a team who are willing to change at short notice if they have to.
Exactly. Nikolay.
Yeah, so the very complex topic again was addressed by you guys, and I will just try to keep it simple. When I don't know, I try to stick to my own values. And my values say that I'm a more conservative person, so I focus what matters most. And I think in this case I will just stick to improve quality and what I'm best at doing it. And maybe I will be a little sluggard and wait, and then I will go into the direction which will be quite clear and proven.
Yeah. Marcel.
I have 2 points. The first point is in terms of size. Don't grow just to be bigger. Growth has a cost in terms of alignment. So make sure you only grow when it really adds value, not just to get bigger. And the second one is about the number of bets or the size of bets you make. So strategic division or decisions for the futures, for me, those are bets. I bet on something going to happen. If you just make one bet and a big bet, that's really risky. If you make 20 smaller bets, that's strategy.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Look, sorry, Richard, last comment.
I absolutely agree.
Fantastic. Look, that's all we have time for, but I'll finish with one very interesting one. I remember back in the day when people said, no expo is going to grow out of Malta. Look at Sigma today, and the irony is we're in Rome. So, look, I just want to say thank you to our panelists, thank you to Sigma. It's been great, and I look forward to seeing everyone here next year.
Thank you.